I want to tell you a bit of a story from my life. Nothing too terribly personal or revealing, but I suppose it's possible you might learn something about me. The story is about urban sprawl and progress. Cities are growing. We all know this. Cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, sending out tendrils into the land, like the pseudopods of some great glass and concrete amoeba. Another way to think of it is like a blast front. The city is a slow explosion, and the epicenter is whenever whatever French explorer, English trapper, or Spanish conquistador stepped off their boat and stuck a flag into the riverbank, saying, "This is going to be something now," as if it hadn't have been something before. In any event, these explosions have been slowly expanding and merging with one another for hundreds of years. I grew up in Columbia, Missouri. I was born in the early 80s, and back when I was a kid there was a farm on a street called Broadway, which was pretty much the backbone of the city. Actually, now that I think about it, by that time I-70 had become the backbone, so I guess Broadway was something else, an older, earlier structure, maybe a notochord. We lived in the middle of town, and when we would visit my grandparents, who lived on the eastern edge of town, we would drive down Broadway past this farm. When I try to imagine it in my mind, the image that I get is always seen from the same angle, which makes me somewhat question the authenticity of the memory. The farm was a single house, on the top of a rounded hill. At the middle of the property there was a large barn, and there were cattle which lived in the field. They would always be walking by a water hole down beside the valley below the barn. There was a large willow tree beside the water, and the cattle frequently stood beneath its shade in the summer. It was the first place I ever saw cattle. I grew up in an inner city in Section 8 housing. Later we moved to a house in more the middle part of town, but it was still an economically disadvantaged, non-agricultural area. In any event, eventually they put in a road beside that farm, and a large box store was put in behind it at the end of that new road. This is the way of progress. Well, by the time I was a bit older, maybe 8 or 9, that farm disappeared. It just closed down one day. The animals were gone. The place was razed. And for some seasons it sat fallow. It's just an empty patch of weeds and nothing. But over the years it became things. It became more useful. There are more efficient ways to raise cattle than on a small family operation. As quaint and charming as such farms appear, they're an anachronism at best. So one by one, they're all evaporating, just like this one did. Today that farm, that water hole, and that willow tree are beneath a parking lot. Whenever I go to Columbia, which is almost never, I drive past it. There's a tobacconist's shop, a guitar store, a number of restaurants, a video game store. Any number of more useful uses of that space than the cattle farm had been, but I always feel a bit sad when I think about that. And when I go into the video game store, see what they have on sale, buy something that I didn't need, I feel a little bit better about the whole thing, because I was never able to buy Twilight Princess or a new Wii remote on that cattle farm. So I suppose in a certain sense that space has become more useful to me as well. A lot of our feelings about things are tied up in our ambivalences. I feel a deep loss that that farm is gone, but in reality, I never benefited from it in any other way than a feeling. Granted, an anachronistic feeling. It was an old-fashioned Laura Ingalls Wilder farm, stuck down in the middle of the slow explosion of an expanding city. But those images of it that I formed in my mind helped to orient my understanding of what farms were. Despite the fact that obviously, by that time, the factory farm was a serious enterprise in the United States. Factory farms are just more, well, useful.